My name is Nicole. I'm 28 years old. Exactly 1 year ago, I stood in my pajamas and watched my house burn to the ground while my mother laughed at my ruins. She thought I'd lost everything, but she had no idea I was just getting started. The orange glow of the fire danced in the reflection of my mother's designer sunglasses. It was a beautiful, terrifying sight. My life, my records, my childhood photos, all being reduced to flickering embers and thick black plumes of smoke. The heat was a physical weight, pressing against my skin and singeing the ends of my shoulder-length blonde hair. I stood on the sidewalk, shivering in my silk pajamas, despite the midsummer heat. My bare feet were stained with soot. I felt hollow, like the house behind me. "Well," a sharp, melodic voice cut through the roar of the sirens. "I suppose that's one way to clean a room, Nicole." I turned, my eyes stinging. My mother, Linda, stood next to her pristine white Lexus, leaning against the door with her arms crossed. She wasn't rushing toward me to see if I was burnt. She wasn't offering a coat. She was smiling. "Mom, I lost everything," I whispered, my voice cracking. "The server in the basement, my designs, it's all gone." Linda let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound I'd heard my whole life, the sound she made when I tripped as a child, or when I told her I wanted to start my own company instead of working for Brandon's firm. "Oh, honey, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving a manicured hand toward the collapsing roof. "You didn't have designs, you had a hobby. Maybe now that your little clubhouse is cinders, you'll finally stop playing CEO in your basement and get a real job. You're homeless, Nicole. It's time to face reality." She looked at the fire, then back at me, her eyes gleaming with a cruel sort of satisfaction. "It's actually quite funny if you think about it. All that effort for a business that literally went up in smoke." I watched a beam fall, sending a fountain of sparks into the night sky. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The sadness was being rapidly evaporated by a cold, hard lump of coal forming in my chest. "I have nowhere to go, Mom," I said, testing her. She sighed, a heavy, performative sound. "I suppose the pool house is empty. You can stay there, provided you keep the place tidy and help out with the housework. I'm hosting the Anniversary Gala in a few months, and I could use a live-in maid I don't have to pay." She didn't wait for my answer. She just climbed back into her car, the power windows gliding up to seal her away from the smell of my ruined life. I looked back at the house. She thought I was broken. She thought my hobby was dead. What she didn't know was that my servers were backed up to a cloud she couldn't even comprehend, and that the little business she mocked had just been valued at 9 figures. I wiped a smudge of soot from my forehead and followed her. The fire was over, but the heat was just beginning. The pool house smelled of stale chlorine and expensive sunscreen. It was a glorified box with a leaky AC unit that groaned like a dying animal every time it kicked on. My bed was a pull-out sofa that smelled of mothballs, a far cry from the Egyptian cotton sheets that were currently sitting in a landfill as ash. For 3 months, this was my world. Every morning at 6 a.m., the main house's intercom would buzz, a harsh, piercing sound that Linda used to summon me. "Nicole, the patio is covered in leaves," her voice would crackle through the speaker. "And Brandon needs his shirts pressed. He has a meeting with actual investors today. Try to look busy when he leaves. We don't want him catching your unemployed energy." I'd spent the morning sweeping the limestone tiles until my palms were blistered. As I worked, my brother, Brandon, stepped out of the French doors, looking smug in a navy suit that was slightly too tight around his waist. He held a coffee mug, my favorite mug, the only thing I'd managed to save from the fire because it had been in my car. "Nice form, Nikki," he smirked, leaning against the railing. "You've really found your calling. Maybe when I'm CEO, I'll hire you to buff the floors at the office. I'll even let you wear your little business t-shirt while you do it." I leaned on the broom, my blonde hair tucked behind my ears, sweat stinging my eyes. "How's the firm, Brandon? I heard the Q3 numbers were a bit soft." His smug expression flickered for a millisecond, replaced by a defensive sneer. "Numbers are fine. We're in a pivot phase. Not that you'd understand. Real companies deal with market volatility. They don't just sell whatever it is you were doing in your basement. Digital paper clips? Logistics algorithms," I said softly. "Right, algorithms." He rolled his eyes. "Well, while you're calculating the algorithm of how to scrub a toilet, try to stay out of the way. Mom's stressed about the Anniversary Gala. She's worried you'll show up looking like a charity case and ruin the photos." He walked away, his laughter echoing against the water of the pool. When the sun finally dipped low enough to grant me some privacy, I retreated into the shadows of the pool house. I locked the door and pulled out my laptop, a high-end machine I'd hidden under the moth-eaten sofa. The screen lit up my face, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. I opened an encrypted window. Incoming message. Marcus Thorne, CFO. Status. Acquisition Phase 4. All signatures obtained from the board. We are waiting on your final authorization for the 100 million wire. I stared at the cursor. Outside, I could hear Linda screaming at a florist over the phone about the color of the lilies for her party. She was drowning in debt, putting everything on credit cards to maintain the illusion of being the Linda Montgomery. I began to type. My fingers flew across the keys, the familiar rhythm grounding me. I wasn't just authorizing a wire, I was authorizing a takeover. Reply. Hold the wire for the public announcement. Also, Marcus, I need you to look into the debt holding for Montgomery and Associates. Buy it. All of it. Use the shell company. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. My family thought they were looking down at me from the heights of the main house. They didn't realize that I was the one holding the ladder, and I was just about to let go. The smell of lemon-scented floor wax was starting to make me nauseous. I was on my hands and knees in the grand foyer, buffing the marble until it shone like a mirror. Every time I looked down, I saw a distorted version of myself. Shoulder-length blonde hair tied back in a messy knot, a gray oversized t-shirt, and eyes that looked far sharper than a homeless daughter's eyes should. "Don't forget the corners, Nicole." Linda's voice drifted down from the balcony. She was draped in a silk robe, clutching a glass of morning mimosa. "The caterers will be here in 2 days for the walkthrough. I won't have them thinking we live like peasants." "I've got it, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "Good, because Brandon's firm just landed a massive partnership." She lied. I knew she was lying because I'd spent the previous night looking at their public filings. Brandon's VP title was a vanity project funded by loans they couldn't repay. "He's bringing the CEO of the partner firm to the gala. This could put us back on top." The front door swung open and Brandon marched in. He didn't look like a man who had just landed a massive partnership. His face was a shade of puce that matched his silk tie, and he was frantically tapping on his phone. "Mom, did the bank call the house?" he barked, ignoring me entirely. Linda froze, her glass pausing halfway to her lips. "The bank? Why would they call here? I told you the refinancing was handled." "Well, the holding company changed," Brandon snapped, pacing across the floor I had just polished. His expensive leather loafers left dull scuffs. "Some firm called Apex Logistics Holdings bought out our primary debt. They're not answering my calls. They're demanding a full audit before the next credit line is released." I kept my head down, scrubbing a spot of dried mud near the baseboard. Apex Logistics Holdings. My shell company. "I'm sure it's just a formality, darling," Linda said, though her hand trembled slightly. She turned her venom on me to distract herself. "Nicole, you're getting water everywhere. Stand up." I stood, wiping my hands on a rag. "Look at you," Brandon sneered, pointing a finger at me. "While I'm out there trying to save this family's legacy, you're just existing, you and your small business. Did you even make $100 this month, or are you still waiting for someone to click a button on your website?" "I'm doing better than you think, Brandon," I said calmly. "Is that right?" He let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Listen, Nikki, when the gala happens, you stay in the kitchen. I'm serious. If the Apex representatives show up, I don't want them seeing my sister looking like a chimney sweep. It's bad for the brand." "I'll stay exactly where I'm needed," I replied, a small, cold smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "See that you do," Linda added, turning back to her room, "and finish the silver by tonight. It's tarnished, just like your father's memory of you." I waited until they were both gone before I pulled my phone from my pocket. I had a text from Marcus. "The audit is triggered. Brandon is panicking. He has no idea the Apex CEO is the person currently scrubbing his floors. Shall I prepare the final report for the gala?" "Yes. Make sure it's printed on the heaviest cardstock we have. I want them to feel the weight of it when it hits the table." I went back to the silver. I didn't mind the tarnish. I knew exactly how to make things shine again. The house had been transformed into a gilded cage. White silk drapes hung from the ceilings, and the scent of 5,000 imported lilies was so thick it felt like swallowing perfume. It was the day before the Anniversary Gala, and the air in the Montgomery mansion was vibrating with a frantic, desperate energy. I was currently standing on a stepladder, adjusting a crystal chandelier. My arms ached, and my shoulder-length blonde hair was damp with sweat, sticking to the back of my neck. "Higher on the left, Nicole. Honestly, do you have no sense of symmetry?" Linda shouted from below. She was clutching a clipboard like a shield. Her face was tight, too much Botox and not enough sleep. "It's level, Mom," I said, my voice echoing in the hollow ballroom. "Don't argue with me. Everything has to be perfect. The guest list has doubled. Every major player in the tri-state area is coming to see Brandon's big announcement." She didn't mention that the big announcement was a desperate attempt to lure in new investors to cover the massive debt I now owned. She didn't know that every time she swiped her black credit card for more caviar, my phone pinged with a notification of a new liability added to my portfolio. Brandon burst into the room, his face pale. He wasn't wearing a tie, and his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, a rare sign of disarray for him. "Mom, we have a problem," he hissed, glancing at me with a look of pure loathing before pulling Linda into the corner. I stayed on the ladder, frozen, pretending to polish a crystal teardrop. Their voices rose just enough for me to catch the jagged edges of their panic. "The audit. They found the offshore accounts, Brandon," Whispered yelled. "The Apex guys, they're not just looking at the books, Mom. They're looking at the deeds. They know the house is collateral." Linda's voice was a sharp intake of breath. "But you said the small business tax write-off would cover it. You said using Nicole's old business address for those loans would keep the banks off our trail." My heart hammered against my ribs. So that was it. They hadn't just mocked my business, they had used its charred remains as a shield for their own fraud. They had used me after I had nothing left. "We just need to get through tomorrow," Brandon said, his voice shaking. "Once the merger is announced, the cash flow will fix everything. We just need to keep up appearances." He turned and saw me staring. His eyes turned into slits. "What are you looking at, Cinderella? Get off the ladder and go to the service entrance. There's a courier waiting with some documents for the catering staff. Get them and don't open them." I climbed down slowly, my legs feeling like lead. I walked past him, catching the scent of expensive scotch on his breath at 10 in the morning. "You look pathetic, Nicole," he muttered as I passed. "Try to keep that poor me face hidden tomorrow. It brings down the property value." I didn't answer. I walked out to the service entrance where a sleek black town car was idling. A man in a suit I recognized, one of Marcus's junior associates, stepped out. He didn't look at me like a maid. He looked at me with profound respect. "Miss Nicole," he said softly, handing me a heavy, leather-bound folder. "The CFO wanted you to have the physical copies. The $100 million acquisition report is on top. The foreclosure documents for this estate are in the back." I took the folder. It was heavy. It felt like justice. "Thank you, Leo," I said. "See you tomorrow at the announcement, boss." He smiled and got back in the car. I retreated to the pool house, locking the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the lumpy sofa and opened the folder. The first page was a bank confirmation. $100 million. My small business had become a titan while they weren't looking. I ran my fingers over the embossed logo of Apex Logistics. Tomorrow, the lilies would wilt. Tomorrow, the music would stop, and I would finally be the one holding the bill. The morning of the Anniversary Gala arrived with the sound of a shattering vase. I heard it from the pool house, the unmistakable crash of porcelain against marble, followed by my mother's hysterical screaming. When I entered the main house, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and floor wax. Linda was standing in the foyer, her face a mask of fury, pointing at a puddle of water and broken shards. "Nicole, where have you been?" she shrieked. She was already in her Spanx and a silk robe, her hair pinned up in tight, aggressive rollers. "The caterers are behind, the pianist has a cold, and now this. Clean it up, now." I didn't argue. I grabbed a towel and knelt. As I picked up the sharp pieces, I looked at the guest list sitting on the side table. My name wasn't on it. Instead, I was listed under staff/support. "And don't even think about coming out the front door once the guests arrive," Linda snapped, pacing back and forth. "I've put out a black polo and khaki pants for you in the laundry room. You'll be assisting the waitstaff with the hors d'oeuvres. If anyone asks, you're a temp hire from the agency. I won't have you embarrassing Brandon in front of the Apex people." "The Apex people are coming?" I asked, keeping my head down. "Yes," Brandon said, stepping out of the study. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was clutching a crystal glass of what looked like straight bourbon. "This is the biggest night of my life, Nikki. If you so much as breathe in his direction and ruin this merger, I will make sure you're out on the street before the last guest leaves. Do you understand?" I looked up at him. My shoulder-length blonde hair fell over my face, hiding the cold fire in my eyes. "I understand perfectly, Brandon. You want everything to be revealed tonight." "Exactly," he said, misinterpreting my tone as submission. "Now go get changed. You look like a gutter rat." I spent the next 6 hours hauling crates of champagne and tray after tray of tiny, expensive quiches. By 7 p.m., the mansion was glowing. The driveway was a parade of Teslas, Mercedes, and black SUVs. Women in shimmering gowns and men in tailored tuxedos moved through the gardens like exotic birds. I moved among them like a ghost. I wore the cheap, scratchy black polo Linda had bought. I carried a silver tray of champagne, weaving through people who had known me since I was a child, yet didn't even glance at my face now that I was wearing a server uniform. Then, the heavy oak doors opened, and a hush fell over the room. A man stepped in. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Brandon's entire car. He had a sharp, military-grade haircut and an air of quiet authority that made the room feel smaller. It was Marcus Thorne, my CFO. Brandon practically tripped over his own feet, rushing to greet him. "Mr. Thorne, so glad you could make it.
Brandon Montgomery, VP of Montgomery and Associates. We've spoken on the phone." Marcus didn't smile. He didn't even shake Brandon's hand. His eyes scanned the room with surgical precision, ignoring the gold leaf and the expensive flowers. Finally, his gaze landed on me, standing by the bar with an empty glasses. For a heartbeat, we made eye contact. He gave the tiniest, almost invisible nod of his head. "Mr. Montgomery," Marcus said, his voice deep and smooth as gravel, "I'm not here for the party. I'm here to finalize the transition. I believe we have a lot to discuss." Of course," Linda chimed in, gliding over and flashing her most predatory socialite smile. "But surely we can have a toast first, to family and success." "Success is a matter of perspective, Mrs. Montgomery," Marcus replied coldly. I felt the heavy folder tucked into the hidden pocket of my server apron. The weight of it felt like a loaded gun. The party was in full swing, the music was playing, and the villains were celebrating. The stage was set.
The dining room was a sea of glittering crystal and the low hum of polite society. I stood by the sideboard, the scratchy collar of the black polo rubbing against my neck. My hands were steady as I poured water for guests who didn't even look up to say thank you. I was invisible, a ghost in my own family's home. Linda stood up at the head of the long mahogany table. She tapped her crystal flute with a silver spoon, the high-pitched ping cutting through the chatter. She looked radiant in her emerald gown, the light of the chandeliers dancing in her diamonds. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," she beamed, her voice dripping with practiced warmth. 30 years ago, I married into this legacy, and tonight, as we celebrate that anniversary, I am so proud to see it reaching new heights. My son, Brandon, has navigated our firm through its most successful year yet." There was a polite smattering of applause. Brandon puffed out his chest, looking every bit the VP he pretended to be. "But success isn't just about what you gain," Linda continued, her tone shifting to a faux sympathetic sigh. She turned her eyes toward me, standing in the shadows by the service door. "It's about how you handle failure. My daughter, Nicole, as many of you know, suffered a tragic loss this year. Her little business literally went up in flames, and she lost her home. But we didn't turn our backs. We brought her in. We gave her a place to stay, even if it meant she had to start from the bottom as our staff tonight." A few guests let out uncomfortable chuckles. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but it wasn't shame. It was the white-hot focus of a predator watching its prey step into a trap. "To the upcoming merger with Apex Logistics," Linda shouted, raising her glass, "to the real success of the family." "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus Thorne said from the end of the table. Marcus Thorne stood up. He didn't have a glass in his hand. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather-bound folder. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the clicking of his heels on the marble floor as he walked away from Brandon and toward the service area. "Mr. Thorne?" Brandon stammered, his face turning a ghostly shade of gray. "The toast. We were just about to discuss the merger paperwork." "There is no merger, Mr. Montgomery," Marcus said, stopping directly in front of me. He didn't look at Brandon. He didn't look at Linda. He looked straight at me. "There is only an acquisition, and I don't take orders from the staff." With a sharp, crisp motion, Marcus handed me the folder. Then, to the collective gasp of the entire room, he bowed his head slightly. "The final audit is complete, boss," Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room.
The $100 million wire has been confirmed. You are officially the sole owner of Apex Logistics and everything its subsidiaries have purchased this month. I felt the weight of the folder in my hands. I looked at my mother, whose glass was frozen halfway to her mouth. I looked at Brandon, who looked like he was about to vomit on the silk tablecloth. I slowly reached up and pulled the hair tie from my blonde hair, letting it fall around my shoulders. I unbuttoned the top of the cheap polo, revealing the diamond pendant I had hidden underneath all day. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I think it's time we discuss the new management." The silence in the room was thick. You could hear the lilies wilting.
The silence in the room wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the air right before a massive storm. All eyes were on me, the maid, the homeless daughter, the charity case. I could see the guests in their $1,000 suits leaning forward, their phones surreptitiously tilted to record the scene. "Nicole?" Linda's voice was a high-pitched trill, teetering on the edge of a breakdown. She forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "What is this? Is this some sort of elaborate joke? Who is this man?" "This is Marcus Thorne," I said, stepping away from the sideboard and walking toward the head of the table. Every step felt lighter than the last. "He's the CFO of my company, the company you called a hobby, the one you laughed about while my actual home was still smoldering." Brandon stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. "That's impossible. Apex is a global logistics firm. They just bought out our debt. They're a titan." "I built the algorithm that runs that titan in the basement of the house that burned down, Brandon," I said, stopping right in front of him. I opened the leather folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. It was the wire transfer confirmation. The number $100 million sat there in bold black ink. Brandon's eyes darted across the page. His face went from pale to a sickly mottled gray. You sold the proprietary code. You didn't just have a shop. You had a software acquisition target." "I had a vision, one I offered to share with this family years ago. But you were too busy laughing at my small business to notice I was out-earning your entire firm by year 2. Linda slammed her hands on the table, her diamonds rattling against the china. "I don't care about your little computer games, Nicole. This is my house. This is my anniversary. You are embarrassing us in front of our friends. Marcus, whoever you are, I want you to leave this instance." Marcus didn't move. He simply looked at me, waiting for my signal. "That's the thing about embarrassment, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous silkiness. "It usually follows the truth. And the truth is, you didn't refinance this house. You took out a predatory bridge loan from a subsidiary of Apex to pay for this party and Brandon's failing margins." I flipped to the second-to-last page in the folder, the deed of trust. "When you defaulted on the interest payment 3 days ago, the debt was called in." I leaned in close to her, so close I could see the fine cracks in her makeup. "I didn't just buy the debt, I exercised the foreclosure option. I own the land. I own the walls. I even own the emerald dress you're wearing, because it was bought on a credit line backed by this estate." Linda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked around the room at her socialite friends, who were now whispering and pulling away from her like she was contagious. You're lying.
she whispered, her eyes darting to the deed. "This is my home." "It was your home," I said, standing up straight and smoothing my blonde hair. "A year ago, you stood on the sidewalk and laughed while my world burned. You told me it was time to face reality." I pulled a crisp white envelope from the back of the folder. I didn't throw it. I placed it gently on her gold-rimmed dinner plate, right on top of her untouched lobster. "Well, Mom," I said, a cold smile finally reaching my eyes, "reality is calling, and it's time for you to see what it's like to lose everything."
The envelope sat on the gold-rimmed plate like a ticking bomb. Linda's manicured fingers trembled as she reached for it, her rings catching the light one last time before her world went dark. She tore it open, her eyes darting across the legal jargon until they landed on the words in bold. Notice to quit, 30 days. 30 days? She looked up, her face white as the lilies. "Nicole, you can't be serious. I'm your mother. You can't throw your own mother onto the street." "You didn't mind the street when it was me standing on it in my pajamas, watching my house burn," I said. My voice was calm, a terrifying contrast to the chaos erupting around the table. "You called it a cleaning. Consider this a deep clean, Mom. I'm removing the rot from the foundation." Brandon let out a strangled sob and half growl. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and desperate. "Nikki, wait! We can fix this. If you own the debt, you can just cancel it. We're partners now. Think about what my firm can do with your capital. We'll be unstoppable." I looked down at his hand on my arm until he slowly let go, his fingers shaking. "There is no we, Brandon," I said softly. "I didn't just buy your debt. I bought the parent company of the firm you work for. I spent this morning reviewing your department's performance, or rather, the lack of it." I turned to Marcus, who was already holding a second, smaller envelope. "Marcus, did you bring the termination papers?" "Right here, boss," Marcus said, handing them to Brandon. Brandon took them, his mouth hanging open. "You're firing me? At our parents' anniversary party?" "I'm firing an incompetent VP who used my company's identity to hide his own failures," I replied. I looked around the room. The friends who had ignored me all night were now staring at Brandon and Linda with expressions of disgust and mockery. The social hierarchy they lived by had just cannibalized them. I reached behind my neck and untied the strings of the cheap black server's apron and let it fall to the floor, a dark, crumpled heap on the pristine marble. Beneath it, I was wearing a simple, elegant silk dress I'd hidden all day. I felt light. I felt like I could finally breathe without the scent of smoke in my lungs. "Enjoy the rest of the champagne," I addressed the room, my voice steady. "It's been paid for by Apex Logistics, but the party is officially over." I turned and walked toward the grand entrance. "Nicole," Linda screeched behind me, "where are you going? You can't just leave us like this. Who is going to pay for the caterers? Who is going to handle the cleanup?" I stopped at the heavy oak doors and looked back over my shoulder. The light of the chandelier hit the gold in my blonde hair, and for the first time in a year, I didn't feel like the girl in the ashes. That's the beauty of reality, Mom. You'll have to figure it out yourself, just like I did. I walked out into the cool night air. The driveway was still lined with luxury cars, but I didn't head for the pool house. Marcus's driver opened the door to a sleek black sedan. As I slid into the leather seat, the interior smelled of new beginnings. No smoke, no lemon wax, no bitterness. As we pulled down the long, winding driveway, I looked back in the rearview mirror.
The Montgomery mansion was glowing, a beautiful palace built on lies and cruelty. From this distance, it looked small. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. My house had burned down a year ago, and for a long time I thought I was sitting in the ruins. But as the cars sped away into the dark night, I realized the fire hadn't destroyed my life. It had simply cleared the ground so I could build something that would never burn again. The Phoenix was finally home.